Coming to this, our second in a series of our forums on the Override Study Committee. My name is Rob Scher. I'm a member of the Board of Selectmen, and I'll be moderating this meeting tonight, this forum, I should say. The forum really is mainly a presentation by Michael Herbert, the Assistant Town Manager, of the kind of review, the process that occurred earlier this year. I want to say February, March, April, when the Tri-Board, which consists of the Board of Selectmen, the Finance Committee, and the School Committee, were meeting repeatedly to put together a budget for FY16, and after a number of issues, finally came up with a good budget. But during that process, it became apparent that there's an ongoing 5-year structural financial deficit looming. And so the members of the board went through a number of exercises to look at that process and what was driving it, and decided that one of the outcomes that should happen was the Commission Override Study Committee. And that's, I think many of the members of that committee are here today. That committee is made up of 2 members of the Board of Selectmen, myself and Steve Mitchell, 2 members of the School Committee, Mark Terry and Aaron Williams. Advisory help from the Finance Committee, and they're represented here tonight by Ryan Turncliffe and Mary Beth Morrissey, as well as, of course, help from the town management staff, the Superintendent of Schools, Jim Adams, Barbara Durand, Tony Schiavi, the town manager, and of course the assistant town manager, Michael Herbert. Did I leave anybody out here? And the Override Study Committee is chaired by Stephen Mitchell. And the agenda, the format of tonight, so as I said, Michael's going to do a presentation, hopefully about 15 or 20 minutes, will be followed by a question and answer session. We really want to hear from people as your thoughts and impressions, your ideas on this. The process is, the schedule in general terms is that we're holding a number of forums, and we've got actually 3 scheduled. There's one here Thursday at 10 o'clock, is it? And we've got 2 more scheduled. One is on Thursday, August 27th, 7 p.m. at the library. Then Thursday, September 10th at the community center, also at 7 o'clock. So the basic process is that the Override Study Committee is going to do a lot of public outreach. That's one of our functions. And to get input and get thoughts and ideas for people from the citizens of Ashland about the issues, the financial issues the town is facing, with the goal of making a recommendation in October or November to the Tri-Board, and then to the Board of Selectmen to get a recommendation to either have an override vote or not to the Board of Selectmen by early December. So that's the basic process, and that would inform the budget setting process for for FY17, which would start next July. So one of the things we're going to do briefly, the Override Study Committee is made up of a number of subcommittees, and I'm just going to, who all have different functions. One is the public outreach, but there are a number of others, and I'm just going to ask the folks that are involved with those committees to give you a short update of where they are and the purpose of their committee. So we'll start with Steve Mitchell.
Thanks, Rob. So besides being chair of the Override Study Committee, I also participate on the Tax Relief Working Group. And this is a group we put together to look at different programs, different opportunities that we could offer those that are in the position of affordability, particularly our seniors. Right now, Ashland actually has an array of programs that are available. There's everything from a elderly exemption that we've had for a number of years. It's called the 41C&1/2 program. That is essentially, for those that qualify, provide a $500 exemption on their property taxes. But there's a host of other programs that are available. There's a tax work-off program. There's CPA exemptions. There's also the senior circuit breaker program that's available. That's a state program. That's not a town program, but that's another available component. So there's a variety of these opportunities. We're reviewing all of them. We're looking at opportunities where we might be able to expand them and provide an additional assistance to those that need it. Of course, everything that we provide in terms of assistance then gets spread out among the rest of the taxpayers. That's how it works. So we're looking at all of those opportunities, what the impact will be on the budget, and it would, we at some point will come back with a recommendation as to how much or which programs to really amplify. One thing I do want to stress is that the operative word in this process here, and it's very much a process, is study. And that's really what we're doing. There might be rumors out there regarding dollar amounts and whatever, but this is very much a study process. We have, as Rob mentioned, we've got a number of public forums coming up, including this Thursday here at the Senior Center, or the Community Center. But we also have a host of various committee meetings. They're all posted on our website, the town's website. They're open to the public. We encourage anybody that wants to come and participate in that ongoing process or make their opinions known to do so. So I think that's it from the tax
All right.
relief.
Thanks, Steve. So, Aaron, do you want to give a brief update on your committee?
Sure. So I'm on the school committee now and part of the data analysis working group, and I work with Michael Herbert, assistant town manager, and Philip Williams, the energy manager, as the two town employees. So yes, I have to work with my husband. And so what we're doing is we're looking at the data behind the necessity for or against an override. So we're looking at DOR data from the state of Massachusetts as far as our expenditures per capita, and looking at specifically against comparative towns. We're focusing on the comparative towns, but we're looking at a lot of Metro West. So our comparative towns we focus on are Holliston, Medway, and Grafton. They're the most like us as far as student population, town population, and total overall expenditures. You know, Framingham and Natick, there's just too much of a difference with Route 9, with commerce, with everything to really make the comparisons with those towns. So we're looking at data there. We're looking also very deeply at Chapter 70, which is the state portion of funding for education. And so we're just really, we've in the last week just started to dig into these numbers of where Ashland is, where our spending is compared. And then as we move forward, we're going to be doing the scenario analysis and what would an override look like and where would it put us. So that's kind of what we're working on.
All right, thanks, Aaron. And I think the last one is the long-range strategic financial planning. I'm going to ask Tony to talk a little bit about that.
Thank you very much, Rob. The third component, obviously, is looking at our long-range financial forecast. And Michael is the finance director. Barbara Duran is the assistant superintendent. Jim Adams and myself are the primary folks working on that. Doing financial forecasts is a standard part of doing business. It's also a requirement of our charter to do that. FY15 was really the first budget that we had to put together since we sort of came into the administration. And as we put together our first 5-year forecast, we saw this looming issue with our budget, even in light of the fact that we had made healthcare reform happen in FY16, some of our energy performance contracts, which was going to help drive down some of our utility costs. We still saw this looming issue. And, financial forecasts in the municipal world, I find very interesting since, part of it you can easily identify in terms of our standard Proposition 2.5 tax increase we have, but other things become a little bit more, require some finesse when you look at, what are your new growth figures, what are your local receipts potentially looking like, those sorts of things. And so the financial, long-range financial planning group really is going to take the work that we did for this year, that first 5-year forecast, and really dive into it to ensure that some of the assumptions we made are sound and that the information that we're getting from that forecast really is, as close as we can possibly get it to be able to make good, solid decisions, and bringing into it the data analysis work that's being done as well, so that we paint as accurate a picture as we can about what the future may hold financially for us, so that we can make good decisions for our community, our taxpayers, and our residents. So that work is getting ready to kick off here very shortly, I'd say within the next week or two, and preparing ourselves to meet the other timelines of the overall override study committee and meeting the milestones we have.
Okay, thanks, Tony. So I'm going to turn this over to Michael Herbert, who's got a presentation. After his presentation, there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers. And, I'll be asking people up here who may want to respond to a question or a statement. So I think we'll be here till about, I think we're willing to be here till about 8:30, I believe. So, so I'd ask you to hold your questions till after Michael's presentation, unless it's, you don't understand the graph, or it's just a question about how does this graph work, or what do you mean by that. But, so without further ado, I'll turn it over to Michael.
All right, thank you, Rob. Can everybody hear me okay? Not yet? Okay. Now, that's good. All right. Well, I just want to reiterate what people have said before. Thank you for coming. It's great to see such a good turnout, and to see so many people engaged in Ashland's future and wanting to learn about Ashland's future and its financial picture. Just want to kind of circle back to talking about that long-range financial forecast and the long-range planning. Long-range financial forecasting is as much of an art as it is a science. It is informed by actions that have happened in the past, and you basically juxtapose that against what you anticipate happening in the future on both the revenue side and the expenditure side. And so once you do that and you start putting things together and you start extrapolating things out over a course of 4 or 5 years, you get a better sense of where you are financially and where you're going financially. And that's really an important tool, because although it's not, set in stone and not locked in, locked, if you will, it at least helps you identify where you're going to have issues and where you're going to have trouble coming down the road. And so that's why it's a really beneficial tool, and that's really one of the things that we looked at going forward after this budget season was, okay, what exactly, we had a very, and I'll just say very contentious budget season in FY16, simply because we ended up having to cut programs. And I'm not talking about cut proposed programs, we cut existing programs. And that was after we had already made some changes at management and the administrative level to basically, we were hoping to avert some of that, some of those decisions. And so we really needed to step back and look at, okay, are we going to continue going down this road where we're having this discussion every year, or are we actually going to try to look at where we are, where we're going, and perhaps even move forward? Because if you're dealing with things on a year-by-year basis, it's really hard to start projecting in the future, and it's really hard to anticipate in the future. So just to get to the solid numbers, when we started putting together our forecast, what we looked at was a projected FY17 deficit of almost $1 million, $961,000, and over the course of 5 years, that deficit was going to grow to about $3.5 million. That's basically taking what our revenue will grow at, and again, juxtaposing that against what we expect our expenses to grow at. And expenses cover a number of different things, state charges, basically debt service payments, and contractual agreements, things of that nature. So you factor all of that in, you throw it in the pot, if you will, and you come up with your numbers for the next 5 years. And so again, that's what the financial forecast is, and this is the picture that we were left with coming out of the FY16 budget season, and really was the impetus for this override study group. So anytime you look at a deficit like that, you need to ask a couple of different questions. Number one, is there something you can do on the spending side that would help reduce that gap? Is there something you can do on the revenue side to reduce that gap? It's, running a municipality from the financial angle is just, pretty much the same as running a business or running your household, if you will. Particulars are a little bit different, but it all comes down to you want to have more money coming in than you have going out. It's pretty simple. So again, if you see that you're in a place where that's not happening, you have to start looking at both of those angles. So, one of the things we really wanted to examine was spending. Are we spending more than we should in areas and in total? And, as Aaron mentioned, once we started looking at, different communities, Metro West communities, we really started wanting to again, paint that picture of our spending overall. And what we saw was that really, in total, if you looked at it objectively, the town of Ashland doesn't spend nearly as much as a number of its Metro West communities. Of course, you've got the communities like Wayland and Sherburne on one end, who you might expect would spend a significant amount of money per capita, and then on the other end, you've got cities and towns like Framingham, Marlborough, and Milford, which don't spend as much per capita. It's not to say that one city or town's better than the other, it's just a reality. And Ashland really kind of falls on the lower end of the scale. So, $2,797 per capita, again, is really not that much when you compare, again, over at the top end of the scale, a little over, or almost $5,500 in Sherburne. And even, if you look at a community like Holliston, still spends, over $500 more per capita than what Ashland would be spending, or what Ashland does spend. So let's dig a little bit more into the detail here and figure out, okay, what are the changes in spending that have happened over the last few years that we can look at from at least a departmental level, see if there's anything there that we can look at and perhaps change. And so what this next chart shows is the change in major spending categories between 2011 and 2016. You see some larger numbers there, you see some smaller numbers there, some that actually went down. I'll just go from left to right. Under general government, which are things like the town manager's office, the town clerk, police, fire, DPW. We've gone up approximately a little over $1 million, or 13.26% since 2011, and that equates to about 2.65% a year. The Ashland Public School budget, which is the next column to the right, has gone up a little over $4 million, 19.11%. That average is about 3.8% per year. And I think we can talk a little bit more about that later, but that's driven largely by some mandates and some particular costs that we have to pay. The Keefe Tech budget, although it doesn't go up a lot in terms of dollar amounts, it does go up a lot from a percentage standpoint, roughly 5.6% per year. Over the last 5 years, well, the beginning of that 5-year period, we saw a spike in enrollment in Keefe Tech. Therefore, we get assessed more. As more students go to Keefe Tech, we have to pay more. We're finding that bubble has kind of worked its way through and has graduated, and so now we see that number coming down. Non-excluded debt, again, from a dollar amount perspective, it's roughly $1.3 million. I don't even want to try to figure out the percentage. It's 259% over the 5-year period, and I know that's really like a shocking number. But if you start drilling down into the details and you're seeing what's driving that, there are really just a few projects. Mainly being the Warren Woods acquisition, the high school fields, Walker Field, Mendez roof replacement. Those all drove up the non-excluded debt service cost by about $1 million over this 5-year period. Now, it's important to note a bunch of that is paid for by CPA funds. So your CPA surcharge goes to fund a lot of those. And then in the last year, we've had some energy efficiency projects that have added to that, namely the Amoresco performance contract and our voice over IP project, which have added to that debt service amount, but we are seeing a corresponding decrease in utilities. That decrease in utilities is more than what our debt service number is. Excluded debt service has gone down as we've paid off different projects. Our capital outlay figure has gone down over that period. And then benefits and insurance, which is something we'll talk about a little bit later, has gone up 15% 15% over the 5-year period, just a little over $1 million. That is, in most Massachusetts municipalities, that is a big budget buster, benefits and insurance. It's something that we at the town of Ashland have really kind of, taken to heart and have made several changes over the last few years to try to control that. And again, we'll get into that a little bit later. But let me talk a little bit about some of the things we've done on the department level to cut spending or find some ways to increase non-tax revenues. Again, with health insurance, we've changed health insurance offerings twice in the last 3 or 4 years. Just in FY16 alone, we've saved over $900,000 by moving towards the state's program, which is known as the Group Insurance Commission. We were part of a consortium before known as the West Suburban Health Group. It was a smaller buying pool. Once we moved over to the Group Insurance Commission and started, being pulled in with the state employees, again, that pool gets larger. You realize an economies of scale. There is a cost to that in terms of losing, a little bit of local control over your plan design and the way your health insurance offerings are. But in the end, the savings is significant and, in our mind, significantly outweighed any of that loss of control. We've done a number of energy efficiency projects over the last couple years. One being Amoresco, our energy savings performance contract. Now, just when we were looking at doing a traditional borrowing, we were going to save $2.5 million over 20 years through that. That's after you net what the utility savings are against what the increased debt service was. But we actually applied for a competitive set of bonds known as qualified energy conservation bonds, which are bonds that are subsidized by the federal government, and you actually get refunded a portion of your interest back. And so we were successful in securing those bonds. We were one of 3 communities in Massachusetts that were able to do so. We were actually able to do it for the full amount of the borrowing, which was $3.2 million, and that's going to save us an additional $800,000 to $1 million over the next 20-year period. We've looked at doing solar projects on a number of different facilities and different parcels. Most notably, the Howe Street landfill. We looked at, we did a zoning change at town meeting that allowed us to do solar upon the landfill. We're still in the process of negotiating and finalizing that power purchase agreement with Amoresco. Expect to have that done by tomorrow. We also are doing projects on the middle school roof and also at the high school parking lot doing a solar canopy. Altogether, those projects are going to save us $4 million over the next 20-year period. And then looking over at the expenditure side, what happens? Your biggest driver of costs in any municipal organization are going to be personnel, and that's true for any department, if you will. And so, as we have faced budget crunches in the past, one of the ways we've rectified those and have addressed those are through personnel reductions. The school department, for example, has lost 26 positions since 2005. Now, they have added certain positions to meet certain mandated programs, but they've lost 26 more positions than they have added. And what happens is, and the superintendent could speak more to this, but as you have to meet those mandated costs and put on personnel to address those mandated expenses, you start losing some of your discretionary programs, if you will, like arts, theater, languages. And so that's what's happened, a continual erosion of our programs at the Ashland Public Schools. And just an example from a department, DPW, we've gone from a high of 29 positions back, in the early 2000s to 22 positions now. That's despite a 15% increase in road miles and a 15% increase in housing units per mile. Why is that important? Well, the more road miles you have to maintain, that's more you have to plow, that's more potholes you have to fill, that's more you have to pave. 15% increase in housing units per mile. That's, most of those, the large majority, if not 100% of those, are water and sewer. So there's an infrastructure cost associated with that. So that's kind of the, the departmental level and some of the things we've done on the expenditure side. I want to spend a little bit more time talking about health insurance because, this was a big win for us as a town and as the town's financial condition moving forward. But again, the employees, really gave up a lot in order to make this happen, and I think it's important to note that. This was the second time they've been willing to come to the table and make these changes in the last few years. And if you see in this graph, what I'm trying to show is what our health insurance expenditures would have been if we had not moved to the GIC compared to what it is or what we expect it to be now that we have moved to the GIC. And, I think I said we saved, $900,000 in FY16 alone. Well, over the course of the next 7 years, we're anticipating saving $8.7 million. So, again, it's a significant savings for the town and something that we worked really hard, both, as management and as employees, to make happen. So that's talking about the expenditure side. We want to move a little bit more towards the revenue side. Again, there's that simple equation. Spending less than you bring in, and if that's not working, you look at the expenditure side, and if that's not working, you look at the revenue side. So in terms of revenue, Massachusetts communities have 4 main sources of revenue, property taxes being one of them, local receipts being another. So that is, things like your building permits, your motor vehicle excise tax, fines and forfeitures, things of that nature. You have state aid, which comes in a number of different forms. And then you have the all other category, which, are things like, your stabilization fund or your rainy day fund, things like that. And so what's happened, you'll see, the 2 circles show 2003 and 2015. And, you'll see a slight decrease in state aid from a percentage standpoint, roughly 14% to just a little over 11% in 2015. And that might not seem like a lot, but that causes a lot of pressure on municipal budgets. And what has happened, not just in Ashland, but in other communities, is that more of the burden has fallen on property taxpayers and fee payers, in terms of the local receipts and things like that, in order to make up some of the shortfall. Just kind of digging in a little bit more into state aid. This graph shows the changes in net state aid, which is what we get paid by the state, the money coming in from the state versus what we have to pay the state. Because there are things that we do have to pay them for, such as charter school assessments. We pay them for the T. We pay them for our membership in our regional planning organization, which is Metropolitan Area Planning Council. So all of those are assessments that we have to pay. And so the difference between those is what's known as your net state aid. And so this shows the last, what the changes in net state aid have been over the last, 6 years. Beginning in 2011, we saw a net decrease of state aid of $228,000. We saw a large influx of net state aid in 2013 of around $444,000. But over the last 3 years, that's really kind of leveled out. You see a pretty decent sized jump in 2016. We'll see if that holds true after the governor, has his way in the fall and winter with 9C cuts. But even if it doesn't, $121,000 in the scope of a $50+ million general fund budget is really not a whole lot. And one of the things I think this really shows is just how little you can rely upon state aid when you're doing budgeting. It's really frustrating because, again, you could have things set when you're doing your budget, and then come November or December, something changes and you find out that you're not getting as much money from the state government as you thought you were, and then you're in a hole. And just one of those pieces in that state aid is something known as our charter school spending and what I call our charter school deficit. Just to explain this a little bit, we have to pay for the students that go from Ashland to charter schools. We primarily, I think they go to primarily AMSA in Marlboro and McAuliffe in Framingham. And again, so we pay to send those students there. We're assessed by the state for that. But then we also get reimbursement for a portion of that, and that reimbursement per student. And that reimbursement level declines over time to where it goes down to, we'll get reimbursed zero for that student. And so what the difference is between what we're assessed and what we receive in terms of reimbursement is what I consider our charter school deficit. And you see a significant increase since 2010, going all the way up to 919,000 from 338,000 just not too long ago. So I think there's a couple takeaways I want everybody to get from this. Is first, this is a significant strain on municipal budgets. But then I also wanted to basically really point out, over the last 2 years, we've done a lot to really kind of stabilize that. And so, hopefully we'll start seeing that number go down over the course of the next few years. So, talking about state aid, let's move to property taxes. Override study committee, what good's an override study committee meeting without talking about property taxes, right? So let's look at our average single family tax bill. Our average single family tax bill is what the average single family residence pays in taxes. The red line represents what Ashland pays in terms of an average single family tax bill. The blue line represents those 16 communities in the Metro West average. As you can see, we're considerably under what the Metro West average is. Right now, we're around $6,500. The Metro West average is closer to $8,000. And again, that does include towns such as Sherburne and Wayland and Sudbury, I believe, but it also includes Framingham, Milford, and Marlboro. So I don't want people to think that this was just stacked with some of our W towns or some of our wealthier communities, just to kind of make this look good. This is, this is accurate data. This is, I think, a pretty solid methodology.
Michael, just to add to what you were just saying about that, even when you take out the richer towns, Ashland is only below, the towns below Ashland are Framingham, Milford, Marlboro, and Millis. So all the other towns, Holliston, Medway, Hopkinton, and Natick, they're all above us. And it's more the cities that are below us as far as average single-family property value.
So what keeps our single-family tax bill, average single-family tax bill, kind of going at a steady trajectory? That is through something, or one of the ways we do that is through what's known as Proposition 2.5, which is what an override refers to, is Proposition 2.5. Prop 2.5, it was a law passed in 1980, went into effect in 1982. It limits the amount of taxation a community can assess in any given year, and it sets two separate limits. One is you can only tax up to 2.5% of the full fair and cash value of all personal and residential property in the town. So that's what's known as your levy ceiling, which is around $55 million here in Ashland. The second is what's known as your levy limit, which is what the town actually taxes. And your levy limit can only go up 2.5% in any given year. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to that. One is if the town passes what's known as a debt exclusion, which we've done here in Ashland for numerous capital projects. And what a debt exclusion is it's an assessment to simply pay for the debt service associated with a capital project. And then the next thing is through an operational override, which is a permanent increase into that tax levy. So let's just say your tax levy is $35 million. If you pass the next year, what you can increase that tax levy by is 2.5%. So 35 million plus 2.5%, and then whatever new construction happens. What an override would do is add on to that amount. So what it would be, using that $35 million example, is you would have the $35 million plus, let's just say you did $1 million override, that would go to $36 million and then 2.5% on top of that. So that becomes your new base moving forward. That's what an operational override is. they can be complicated. There's a number of different idiosyncrasies between different overrides and different debt exclusions. You have things called capital exclusions. You can have things to fund stabilization funds, certain stabilizations. A lot of that can be found in at the Mass Department of Revenue website, which is this mass.gov/DOR. If you just go there, there's a pretty prominent search box, and you just type in Proposition 2.5 primer. Or levy limits, and that should bring you to that PDF. So that's really my presentation for tonight. Just to kind of reiterate what Rob was talking about in terms of next steps. We're going to have a senior focused meeting on August 6th at 10 a.m. here at the Community Center. Now, I said senior focused. That does not mean it's only for seniors. It's open to everybody. But what we do want to talk about there is some of the tax relief measures that Steve has talked about, and basically start more of a, I guess you could say, an intimate dialogue with certain constituencies and stakeholders throughout the town, and start finding out some of their individual needs and individual concerns moving forward. And then we have a couple more public forums on August 27th and September 10th. I'm not saying that that's going to be the end. I assume we're probably going to have a few more. And basically, any and all of us can be reached via email, or reach out and contact us via phone. You don't have to wait for these forums to come and ask us questions. We're more than willing to answer questions and talk about issues. And we would ask that if you do want to talk about that, you send it to the whole committee's email address, which is overridestudycommittee@ashlandmass.com. So that, again, that's the end of my presentation.
All right,
So
thanks, Michael.
open up to
One thing,
questions.
is this, is your presentation, it is on the town website now, is that correct, this
So
presentation?
we'll put it up tomorrow.
Okay.
We made a few little tweaks. There is a website on the town's website, or section of the town's website, devoted to the Override Study Committee. If you go to Boards and Committees on the Ashland Mass homepage, underneath you'll see Override Study Committee. If you click to that, we'll have this presentation on there. We also have a link to the video from the first forum that we had last week, or a couple weeks ago. So,
And that was
we'll put more
exciting,
information.
believe me. So.
Yeah, it was a thrilling engagement.
But, so, all right, so now we're into our question and answer part. Were people able to see those graphs well enough from the back? I mean, feel free to ask questions. We can go back to yes, Cliff, but did you have
There was one thing, Michael, when you were talking about the Amoresco,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I misunderstood it.
Cliff, excuse me, if you want to, there's a microphone up here, that way people can hear you and who are watching. And also, other people, I'd ask you to, line up at the microphone if you'd like. We have plenty of time, so, take your time. But just before we get in it, but did the graphs work okay? Were people able to see them from the back? Feel free, one of the things you feel free to ask, if you want to go back and look at a graph again and ask questions about it, feel free. Okay, go ahead, Cliff. Is it on?
Yeah, you're good.
It is? Okay. You were mentioning the Amoresco, and I think I missed something, being in the back and possibly not being able to see the graph quite as well. You said something to the effect of, we spent $3.2 million, and I hope that rings a bell with you so that you can refer to this, to save $800,000 to $1 million over 20 years. And there's something wrong with that message, so I'm sure that I misunderstood it. Because I don't want to spend $3.2 million to save $800,000 to $1 million over 20 years.
I would probably be fired if I thought that would be good.
If you could clarify that, I'd appreciate it.
So the cost of the project was $3.2 million. Over the course of that 20-year project period, we expect to save well over the $3.2 million, so closer to $6 million. So you take what we're going to save, and you subtract what we're spending for it, and then that's what your savings are over the course of the period.
Thank you.
Good evening, John Kerwin, 21 Hardwick Road. Doesn't take a genius to figure out where I stand on tax overrides. But I have two questions.
Sure.
It deals with the same graph. You showed a graph where you compared Ashland's average tax bill versus the rest of Metro West.
Yep.
My first question is, are we comparing an apple to an apple? Because if you compare our tax bill to, say, Framingham's includes trash. Many other communities includes trash, ours does not. And I can't tell you if some of them include water and sewer, I don't know, but there are some in town that argue that water and sewer is an override account anyway. My second question is, so what? What difference does it make what other towns charge their residents for taxes in this? It doesn't matter. We're not them, we're us.
So just, to answer, I think I'll consider the first statement a question. We are doing much more. John makes a good point. I mean, if you don't just want to look at taxes, you want to look at total spending. You want to look at things like water, sewer bills, and the other fees. So what we are doing, part of the data analysis group, is we're looking at 4 different sets of fees to hopefully add on, get a better picture of those 16 Metro West communities. One's water, one's sewer, one is trash, and then the other is bus fees. We're thinking about doing athletic fees, but that varies by sport and by community so much. We wanted to try to find a way to do as apples to apples as possible. I think from the preliminary analysis, what we're seeing is, aside from sewer, we're pretty much, in line with some other communities. Especially the ones that we're looking at. I mean, yes, Framingham, spends, their trash is part of their taxes, but, their tax rate is also about, almost $1 more per 1,000 than ours.
So I think, it is difficult disaggregating all that data between all the towns, but, we're working on it. Just a little note, feel free to give your name and address, but you don't have to, so go ahead.
Now I get to choose Tim Dunn from Ashland. The bar graph on town of Ashland spending. You're talking about a structural deficit. How much of that is attributable to, what is it now? We're down to 6 or 7% as far as the percentage revenue coming from businesses, business property taxes?
So I wouldn't say we're down too. That's been pretty steady.
Well, when I came here 8 or 9 years ago, the number was between 12 and 13. And there have been a number, 2 or 3 iterations coming out of town hall saying that we're going to streamline everything and we're going to build the base back up, and it has never gotten off the ground fully. And it's slipped to, is it 6 or 7?
It's around 7 to 8%, yes.
7 or 8, okay. How much of that has to do with this bar graph and the structural deficit?
So it doesn't have much to do with the structural deficit. What it does have is how much of the tax burden goes on residences as opposed to businesses. Mm-hmm. So, you would still have the same kind of, same spending. It's just, you would have more in terms of valuation from the commercial side. And again, commercial in businesses could bear more of that property tax burden versus homeowners. That's especially true if a community decides to go towards something called a split tax rate, where they have a different tax rate for businesses than they do.
Business,
Right.
We had made discussions, I don't know if you were, or whether it was before your time, we were talking about making a split.
Well,
Tax
It
rate
was,
to
it was
attract
probably
business.
before my time,
Yeah.
but, I think one of the other things to mention in terms of the split, obviously there's been a lot more residential development in town during the period of time that you were talking about versus increasing business activity. When you
Went
consider...
from 14,500 to 17,000 population.
Yeah, so the other aspect there as well is that, when you look at all of our commercial properties, although we do have some vacancies, we actually have a pretty low vacancy rate, but we do have properties that are, I think, ripe for some commercial development activity, and certainly that's part of our agenda, is try to increase that commercial base, again, to help perhaps maybe shift a little bit of that burden over to that,
Certainly would be nice.
sector.
Yes.
can I just add that, one of the things when the tri-board was going through all these, what do we do now? It's certainly, there's a continued emphasis on economic development. And so that's a good point you've raised. That is definitely on the agenda. I don't know if anybody here else wants to talk about the efforts on economic development, but it's not something we're taking for granted. It's a major initiative.
Might be something
here.
you want to include as far as your, like you said,
Yeah, that's
another driver towards
yeah,
fixing the
that's a
structural
good point,
deficit.
because we didn't really talk about that as another revenue source.
Percent change jumping over to the bar graph on percent change in net state aid, excuse me. I just want to be clear that the starting point of 2011, at a certain point, there was state aid, and it starts off at X, and these are just differences from that. Okay, it's not starting from zero.
Right. So,
Percentage
so your
change.
net state aid is
Okay.
one amount. So,
So 4 out of the 5 years, there were increases. All right, in the
the
state
5
aid.
out of 6, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, I can count. It's my brother that can. All right, and again, the property taxes, the line graph, average single family tax bill. I'm trying to reconcile the structural and the fact that there are 351 communities in the state, and when you look at per thousand on residential properties, last year we were 60th highest as far as being taxed. All of our homes, we are 60th out of 351 of the communities as to how high we are taxed.
How's that, I'm sorry, in what term, Tim? Is that absolute
Oh,
or
it's
percent?
dollars per thousand.
Dollars per
Tax
thousand.
rate.
I'm sorry.
What's the
So-
source of that?
DOR.
information? DOR? Can you give us the path so we can?
Oh, I
Look at
don't,
it?
just,
Yeah,
oh, if you're right in there with the.
We can find it.
Yeah,
We can find it.
It's one page over,
okay.
yeah. Yeah. We were 53rd, jumped to 55, and for the last 2 years, it's either been 59 or 60. I don't know where we're going to come in this year. Do you know?
I don't know.
Where our tax rate actually went down this year, so.
I'm sorry.
Our tax rate went
actually
down.
went down
Oh, it
in
did.
FY15.
Yeah, we were
Even with the 2.91% increase.
Yeah, we went from 1739 to 1730.
Uh-huh. I didn't know there was that much building going on. Wow. Okay.
Re- No.
No, that really has to do with valuations.
So the
And
valuations
that's
went
your
up.
other kind of variable in that factor there.
So I guess what I'm saying is not very articulate. Is the average single-family tax bill, we show we're way under the Metro West on average, but as far as per thousand on our homes, we're way up. How do we, I can't,
But there's communities in western Massachusetts that have call fire departments that are regionalized for school districts that do a lot
No
of
police
synergy,
department.
local police or synergist, like the synergies between towns where they're sharing.
yeah, joint.
There's
Right.
sometimes the state police are covering some of these towns.
Yeah.
And also the property values in those towns are going to be lower. So I'm thinking of 60 towns and we're 60th, look at how many towns are inside the 495 belt.
Yeah.
And that's what I would be, I mean, what we've as a data analysis group focused on is Metro West because that's the most like us.
Yeah.
But I would contend that we could be comparable to pretty much anything inside the 495 belt other than the cities.
That might be an interesting number to look at
And we can
sometime.
look at that. We can expand.
Yeah.
The data's
Something
there.
To shadow the thought in my mind that it's telling me that we are the 60th most expensive place to live when it comes to property taxes. Never mind all the ancillaries, and I'm looking for somebody here to
Well,
disprove.
well, I would say that a more accurate reflection of tax burden and expensive, expense is the average single-family tax bill.
Yeah.
That's what DOR would consider. Tax rate, again, is one variable in an equation, the other one being values, and then the other one being spending. Again, like Aaron said, I would like to see, in terms of, the total tax rate, how many, let's just say we're 60th, how many of the 59 above us are Metro West communities? Because there is, I don't want to, be flippant about it, but I mean, there is a cost to live in Metro West. Metro West is one of, if not the most expensive region in Massachusetts, which of itself is one of the most expensive, states in the country to live in. I mean, that's just fact. So, I think it's important when we're talking about apples and apples, I think it's important to look at Metro West communities because certainly if somebody here wants to move where they can get a lower tax bill, they could move to, what's the town I use, Joel? Gil, yeah, Gil. So you can tell Gil and I have had this discussion, or Joel and I have had it. Okay. So Gil or Lowell, where the average tax bill is, 3,800. So I think that's important. Again, to look at if we're going to start trying to do an apples to apples comparison.
Yeah. Maybe take a look at property values, what the average property value is. Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, Tim. Yes, sir.
Good evening, John Featherston, 98 Heritage Avenue. First, I want to commend you guys for doing this. I mean, I think it's nice. It's good leadership. This reeks of Steve Mitchell, and that's meant as a compliment. So thank you to Steve Mitchell for that. The public process is good. That being said, I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but this is not a unique problem to Ashland. This is a problem in every community and city in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That being said, we make these decisions to raise our families in Ashland, and to your point, if you want a lower tax bill, there are other options. But I look at it as the glass is half full. This is a great community, okay? And we're not Holliston, we're not Hopkinton, we're not Medway, and there's nothing wrong with that, okay? And we have things that are better than those communities, and we have things that are other opportunities. One thing that I want to point out, and it's nice to see how many school people are in this room, and to Mr. Adams, you talk about our financial constraints, and you look at our school system. Come on, guys. That's heaven. It's heaven on earth. We've got a great school system. We've got a great leader of our schools. It's not so bad. That being said, I'm not saying that, things can't be tweaked. But an override to me is a nuclear option, okay? It's the end all of end alls. And a couple things that I was hoping that I'd hear tonight that I haven't yet heard. I've heard the $4 million figure. I heard a $5 million figure. I heard a $6 million figure as well. If you're going to sell this to the community, which you should be commended for trying to do, what's the price? And more importantly, what am I buying? What am I getting? I still don't know. I still don't know, and maybe that's to come, but I need to know what I'm going to buy if I'm going to, do it. I'm systematically against an override. I'm, fiscal conservative. That being said, if it makes sense, it might be a good investment. But even, I've been here an hour tonight, I still don't know what I'm buying.
Well,
So
I'd say,
I hope
John,
that'll come.
Could just not to interrupt you, but if someone else wants to address this, but we haven't reached that point yet. We're looking at, our alternatives. We're certainly open to ideas and input, and I think that's one of the things we'll end up with. But I don't think anybody here has a preordained answer in their head of what may or may not be necessary. So that's
can I just
to get
stop
to
you
your
right there?
question. Sure.
And I thank you for the answer. That is what in itself scares me the most. Okay? You've said also that there's a timeline that, you want to button this up by the wintertime. Well, if we don't know what we're doing by now, we've got the fall to figure it out. So maybe, and I'm not criticizing, I'm just throwing it out for a discussion piece, maybe we're going a little bit too fast. Because if we haven't figured it out, but then we're going to have a winter decision on this, maybe we're going a little bit too fast, and it's not for me to decide. That's what you get paid the big bucks
Well, I
as a
guess
selectman
I'm
to
just wondering
decide.
what you would suggest in terms of, I get paid no bucks, but,
Oh, I'm aware.
but yes. But in terms of a process, though, are you suggesting that we need to do more of a financial analysis process? Because that's really what we're involved in now.
I'm trying to be polite is what I'm trying to be. I'm trying to be polite is that
Go ahead, Michael,
the
yeah.
town's been talking about this for a year. Okay? And it's
Not
fair.
quite a year. It hasn't
Well,
been a year, has it?
but it's been percolating for over
Sure.
a year. I have the utmost respect for Steve Mitchell as a former chair of the Finance Committee, Mr. Schiavi, and Mr. Herbert. You guys know where you're at, okay? And if you don't, let's have that conversation. But I know that you guys know that you're where you're at, and that's fine. That's great. But what I hear a lot of savings, and if I add up the savings versus the projected, cost overrides, we're about flat. So and correct me if I'm wrong on that, but the one thing that I really want to see in going forward is you add up our tax bill in Ashland, and it's uniquely difficult to add, because I would sit there and say, much like Mr. Kerwin says, our water and sewer is different than any other community. Those orange trash bags are a hell of a lot of money. They're an override. You can say Ashland's never passed an override, but I tell you every Tuesday when I put out my orange garbage bags, that's an override, you know? Bus fees, athletic fees, those are overrides, you know? I'll sit there and say it. Mitt Romney never raised our taxes, but he sure did add a hell of a lot of fees to this state, you know? So, I mean, you know, I'll be fair. You can
So I think
criticize.
one of the things we're going to do some more work on quantifying these non-tax revenues for comparison purpose. I don't think we're unique in having, you know,
Right.
trash bags and bus fees.
Well, I
and
think we're
things
still unique, Rob. I mean, it's trending, but I don't want to take up everybody's time. I just have two other points that I really want to talk about. And once again, if you look at that graph, when spending was increased, and this is, I really want to drill down on this.
Which graph is that?
When, the one that Michael put up when, you know, when increases were coming up, and Tim referenced it, there was 5 out of the 6 years.
Or the
What-
changes in net
What sticks
savings?
out to me there as a political junkie, look at political year funding. Okay, election year funding. And that's really what we're going to stress it down. You know, Senator Spilka and Santa Candra should be commended for getting that extra money for the schools. But I would like to see more from them on a continual basis. Because when I sit here and say, we're going to stutter Chapter 70, once again, that gets the hair on the back of my neck. We know it's broken. Cut the rhetoric, fix it. Okay? And that pressure needs to be put on the legislature, and that pressure needs to be put on Charlie Baker and Karen Polito as well. Ashland is getting robbed on Chapter 70 money. It's time for us to get our head out of the sand and realize it and hold people accountable. And we cannot continue to not let them, you know, be accountable for it. It's not a criticism of them. They've got an uphill battle. But for us to turn the tide so we're not having this conversation every year, you, the Board of Selectmen specifically, have to apply that pressure. It has to be done. We all know that, you know, we can study it all we want. We know we're not getting our fair share. And with that, I'll end. Thank you.
All right, thanks, John. Did you want to say something?
Yeah,
Mike?
I just want to talk about the process, you know, comment that John made. And, you know, I understand people want a number. I feel the tension, you know, everybody wants a number to latch on to. I think what we probably should do a better job of doing is talking about what these forums are for. These are really, you know, we're doing a lot of talking. I think we want to get to a point where we're doing more listening, because we can't come up with a number until we start figuring out what you want. If you want to just keep level services, that's going to be a specific number, of course. But if you want to see increased, you know, maintenance of your roadways, if you want to see a more robust paving program, if you want to see more police or firefighters on the street, if you want to see a language program or arts and theater restored back into the public school system, there's a cost associated with that too. And we can come up with a number. We could have our little cabal and say, okay, this is what we think is the best for Ashland. This is what Ashland needs, and this is what Ashland wants in terms of enhanced services and programs. But what we're trying to do, and again, maybe we just need to do a better job of doing it, is listening to you, and I'm looking at, you know, the community, and try to figure out what it is that you want and listen to what you want in terms of services. Because we're coming to the point, and nobody wants to talk about this, but we're coming to a point where there are going to be cuts. We've had to make, the reason we've always been able to balance the budget because we're required to, but there's a cost associated with that. And so all those cost-saving measures that we've talked about and you know, really kind of applauded ourselves on, those were all done just to balance the budget, and we still have lost services. So again, we're going to have to start talking about cuts, and then that's another portion of the discussion. If we do need to look at cuts, if we don't feel like there's an appetite for an override, what would you like to see cut?
All right, thank you, Michael. Okay, go ahead, Jim.
65 Elliott Street, Jim Hanna. Interesting conversation going on. I've learned a lot just standing in line. I only have a couple of concerns. I came here a little late, so I don't know whether you introduced to the audience the liability the town has that they don't know about or don't want to know about it, and that's the retirement liability of about $35 million as it sits today. Is that into the program forecasted expenditures, or
You mean the
set asides,
OPEB?
or whatever you do?
The OPEB liability?
The retirement liability for future
Yeah,
years.
OPEB.
So, I mean, we have our assessment from the Middlesex County Retirement System that we pay. And so,
No, I
the
don't
whole-
mean that. I mean it's liability that you have growing out there while they're still working. One of these days, they're going to go and get it.
Yeah, he's talking about the OPEB liability, Michael.
Yeah, the OPEBs and PED.
Right,
and
yeah.
OPEB,
come on.
right.
so just, I want to start with the pension first, just because all communities are required to meet a schedule where they are fully funding their pensions by 2038. So I want to talk about that, just put that to rest in terms of pensions. OPEB, other post-employment benefits, which are, it's mainly retiree health insurance. That is something that is looming large on all Massachusetts municipalities, as Mr. Hanna stated. What we've done is we've taken specific steps to start meeting that. We started an OPEB stabilization fund, which is funded through our free cash number that we receive in the fall. We have established, at the last town meeting, we established what's known as an OPEB trust, which we take money actually out of that stabilization and put it into the trust. And we do that so we can achieve a higher rate of return. That money can grow just like, regular investments. So we are starting down that road. We're actually trying to look at where we're going to be at a point where we're fully funding our OPEB liability in addition to our pension.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to hear from you, and I suggest, or you suggest to me, that additional monies are going to be shown in the forecast of the reasons and causes of the override. Okay, now.
And
I
just
have-
in terms of the number, though, just to clarify for folks, it's not 35 million, so it's
Oh,
it's
I'm
just.
sorry,
But I know, but it's
22
just.
or whatever it is,
right,
it's a
and-
number out there.
Right, and this year, every 2 years, we go through sort of a revaluation of that, which should be happening, I believe, this August. And we think because of the healthcare reform that we did, we'll actually, without really doing anything other than that, we'll end up bringing it down even further just by
Good.
changing the
I
health
hope it goes
insurance.
to
So-
zero, but it must be,
We do
whatever
too.
you think is necessary must be in that forecast for the override. Now, the other thing that bothers me, and I'm sure it's going to bother the entire community when they finally wake up, is that this government of ours is a three-legged stool. And we are using two legs excellently. The school is cooperating, the town is cooperating, and nowhere in vision is the finance committee, who's, oh, excuse me, fine. Okay, then perhaps you could then help me. When do you guys enter into this equation? When everyone finally determines that they think they're getting all their money from all these various sources, and
If you
you
wanna
have
stand
to
up.
approve it.
Yeah, you may want to, here. Yeah, come here and sit down.
Is it on yet? Has a delay here, right? So we cannot be on the committee officially
No, no, I
of
don't
our
want you on
charter,
the
but
committee.
we are attending all of these meetings.
Yes.
And actively engaged in all of the analysis and work that everybody's doing up here.
Yes.
But still, in the end, when we make a recommendation, we have to be a bit non-biased. We can't go in there at town meeting if an override is on. We're involved in the capacity where we want to be able to be knowledgeable as to what work's been done all the way along the way, add our 2 cents here and there, but we also still, in the end, on the Finance Committee, need to be non-biased and make our decision based on all the facts without being a voting member of any of this committee. Does that answer your question?
Oh, no, it does. It answers my question. But when do you going to present this analysis? Is it sometime when the two stools are all done and a school committee has got what they believe is what they can live with?
So
and
at
the
a town
has-
meeting?
What?
At town meeting, are you saying?
So-
When we-
No, whenever this committee concludes.
So, can I answer? So Jim, the process is that the Override Study Committee will make a recommendation to the Tri-Board, which consists of the Finance Committee, the School Committee, and the Board of Selectmen. And and that committee will then make a recommendation. I'm not 100% sure if the Finance Committee has a role as a committee prior to the actual override our town meeting.
We don't get to decide whether it goes on the ballot or not, but we can recommend, once it is on the ballot, whether we're for it or not,
Well,
and
that's-
provide our
yeah,
support.
well,
And I imagine at that point, if it does get on the ballot, we'll probably be doing some portion of a presentation or providing our comments and feedback.
All right, that's fine. I now at least feel like there's something out there that represents the Finance Committee. I didn't realize that sitting in the audience is okay. I thought you had to sit up here somewhere and get your oodles, but, yeah.
All right.
Oh, okay, so that's fine with me. Thank you very much.
All right,
You're
thank
doing
you,
a great
Jim.
job. Keep it up.
Thanks, Jim. And just, if other members of the committee wish to speak or respond, just kind of wave in my direction. I have trouble seeing everybody down. Okay, Steve, did you want to say something? Go ahead.
Just quickly, I think to answer Jim's questions a little bit more, I don't think we had on any of the slides just kind of the time frame, and I think it goes to John's questions as well. So our subcommittee work is taking place through the first half of September, at which point then the full override committee will meet in September and October to deliberate and come to a consensus of some form or fashion. At that point, we anticipate that the override study committee will make a presentation to the tri-board committee, enough committees here, at which point the tri-board would come to a consensus, and then the Board of Selectmen would act or choose to act at that point sometime in December.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Go ahead, Cliff.
Before I get to a more serious question, I'd like to just interject a little bit of humor here. I have my 1949 tax bill from Ashland.
Oh, my gosh.
$134.20 for the year. Not in 4 quarters, not in halves, for the year. Anyway, I just thought I had to throw that out.
Could you pay that online?
If I could have, I would have. And now I don't want to pick on Jim here.
He's
Because
lonely over here. So.
No, I don't want to pick on Jim because I don't really, it's an issue he has to deal with, it's an issue the town has to deal with, and he has my greatest sympathy and admiration for doing the best he can with it. First of all, could I ask the question, what percentage of our tax bill goes to the school system as opposed to town government?
Roughly half.
Roughly half?
Yeah.
That's all? Okay, because I mean, I've heard figures of 60%, 70%, and I know that in the past it was, years ago it was much lower, so.
Well, let me qualify that.
Thank you.
So that's in terms of just, operational. I'm not counting in the portion of our debt service or benefits that goes towards school-related expenditures.
That's fine. What I do want to get to, and it's something that you brought up a number of times, Michael, in your presentation, thank you. You kept mentioning the term state mandates without funding. Now, I don't have any kids in school, and I'm not saying I don't want to pay for the kids in school. That's not the point I'm making at all. I don't have any kids in school at the moment, so I just am not as aware of some of these things. But I have been talking to some of the teachers, administrators, people in colleges who have to deal with the kids that are coming out of the school system. One of the things that I hear, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is number one, I'm going to talk about buses. I'm going back to a day when we all used to get on the bus. Well, I didn't, I walked, but we get on a bus and we'd go to school. From elementary to high school, we all got on the same bus, and we may have gotten dropped off at different schools, but we all got on the same bus at the same time. That went away when drugs became a problem in town, and they had to separate the young kids from the older kids because they were afraid of bad influence. But now I understand that the state mandates that we have to provide a certain number of buses for the kids who may or may not use the buses. Is that, can you answer that one?
So the state requires busing for students who live outside a certain area.
What is that area, by the way?
It's 2 miles.
It is 2 miles, thank you, okay.
Right. Yeah, right, but it's required K through 6. So anyone after the 6th grade, thanks, Marcia, anything after the 6th grade is not required.
Okay. I just wanted to get that clear because, you know, the information I get, I'm not sure, it could be tainted, so.
Mr. Wilson, sorry, I apologize. So part of it, remember, we do charge a busing fee that helps offset those transportation costs. The concern I have...
I have no problem with the
Sure.
fee.
Yeah.
My concern is with the fact that we have buses that are going every day to the school, and I see them leaving half full.
Yeah.
And I see them going over the same routes repeatedly. And then I also have another issue, and I'll address this to any parent in town who picks up their child at school and goes in the most inappropriate manner of driving and parking in order to do it and clogs up the streets and the traffic in town. We have buses for kids outside of a 2-mile limit, and yet we drop kids off 100 feet away from the school. Specifically in this case, Fruit Street, I see the buses pull out and they pull across the street and children exit the bus at, I don't know if it's the street you live on, Rob, or the next street down. But it's a Carriage House or...
Stagecoach, a Davis Farm.
One of
Davis
those.
Farm, yeah.
But anyway, to me, it just seems like a complete, total waste of money that we're spending a lot of money on busing, and we're not getting anywhere near full value for it. That's number one.
Do you want to just respond to that?
There's no response. I couldn't agree more, Mr. Wilson. We need to, yeah, no,
I thought you'd agree.
If we could get the buses to full capacity, that would be fantastic. I believe some families do not ride the bus, partly because of the fee, and they drop them off. It's more convenient for those family members. So it is a struggle. I agree. I mean, we monitor the membership on a regular basis. We stand out there and do a count. And you go in the mornings, stand at the high school in the morning and watch the 14 buses that drop off students. There are many that are well under capacity. In the afternoons, however, they actually have more capacity. Students are more apt to be on the bus in the afternoons than they are in the mornings at the upper levels.
I know I'm preaching to the choir a bit here, and I'm probably going to be preaching to the choir again with the next one. It's also my understanding that in many classrooms, we have a teacher and a teacher's aide. And my understanding is that the teacher primarily teaches, and I don't want to, I don't know, special needs is probably a non-political word now that you can't use, and yet I don't think it really means anything about the child's ability. I think it has more to do with something else. But a teacher teaches one group of children, while the teacher's aide teaches another group of children. And correct me if I'm wrong on that one, or
yeah, I would like
to
to. Yeah, actually, it doesn't work that way. The aide whom is in the classroom with the teacher is actually there assisting not only students who are on IEPs, individualized education plans, they're actually there working with all students. So it's actually an opportunity for a co-teaching model, which shows actually students grow a lot more when you have two teachers in the classroom helping one another. But they're in there because of the requirement, for sure. But they're not working with just that child if it's done the right way.
All right, but that is a state mandate?
It depends on...
To a certain degree. I
correct.
know that
It depends on the plan that's put in place by a team process, yes.
Okay, and that's fully funded by the state?
Negative.
Okay, so here's here's my real point, is I think Tony's done a great job. I think Jim has done a great job. I think Michael's done a great job. I think the selectmen have done a great job. However, where we really, really, really have a problem here, folks, I mean, we can do as much as we want as a town, but what we've got to do is we've got to get to a point where we tell the state once and for all, and I mean, this is something I've been hearing for the past 30 years, if you're going to mandate something, you're going to pay for it. And if you're not going to pay for it, we're not going to do it. You know, if we just didn't do what the state mandated, and they'd say, well, we're not going to give you the money, we'd save money. So think about that. And let's get on the phone to Karen Spilka and to Tom Sanacandro and to the governor and to the lieutenant governor, who was mentioned before, and tell them, look, we've had enough. We can't afford to continue to have you tell us to do things that you're not going to pay for. That's it. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Liv. Go ahead.
Good evening, Steve Morgan.
You could,
Steve,
Karen,
just one second. So
just-
chapter 70, Jim, Michael, myself, Steve, we met with Karen Spilka and Tom Sanacandro's aide. They are fully aware of how disappointed Ashland is. And this is the first year where it seems like DOE has a concerted effort in actually reevaluating the program and looking at what is going to be funded and what isn't going to be funded by Chapter 70. But I would look at it, and so yes, there's progress there, but it's a slow one. I know Marcia has dealt with this for her entire tenure of school committee. So I don't expect that to go fast, but think of it this way. Warren Buffett talks about how he pays more taxes than his secretary. And all of us think that that's probably wrong and would like to change that. But how quickly is the federal tax code going to change? It's not going to change very quickly. But you have to work on your own wallet and your own budget. So Ashland's in the same position. We can't change Chapter 70 overnight. Believe me, we're doing everything possible to do it. But we still have to work on making Ashland right and doing what is right by these kids. And as a parent of a special needs kid, I don't want to say that we're not going to do what the state requires to do them.
thanks, Aaron. Thank you. Okay, go ahead. Next one.
And good evening. Just a couple comments. I know I had an opportunity to make a few comments a couple weeks back with the library meeting. I guess in general, I'm a firm believer that an override should not be necessary, and that the focus of this committee, as set up, should be on finding ways to prevent the need for an override, as opposed to what appears to be, to me at least, an activity to try and sell the public on an override. As I said at the prior meeting, I think this is a premature period of time. The budgetary process has not gone through the normal bylaws and steps that are required. It appears that this year we're going to use an alternative process to create the budget and do the planning. I know as a member of the Capital Committee, I made my comment last time, and I know we have it now on our agenda for Monday to talk about our involvement in this process, but it appears we were left out of the process in terms of our involvement and input. I know we're going to discuss it at our meeting on Monday. Not sure what that will be, but we'll have an opportunity to discuss it. It is concerning to me, as I learned from the moderator, and I wasn't at the tri-board meeting, and there's been some dancing around the topic this evening about the participation of the Finance Committee, which is a citizen watchdog committee, in this board, even on an advisory basis. I think is a direct violation of a bylaw. Looks like it was discussed in the minutes at the tri-board. Folks have kind of couched it, decided to proceed ahead anyway. As a Ashland resident, I think it's very important that Finance Committee maintain its independence. That's why the bylaw is there. I strongly object to this kind of direct participation because it puts us on a different process than the town charter. And I don't disagree that sharing information should occur. Everybody should be sharing information. Everybody should be, trying to get the best plan, focus on saving money for the town. But that's where our focus ought to be, in my opinion, is getting a budget that works. 2.5 is not a guaranteed 2.5. The idea is that you will not exceed the 2.5. Actually, it turns out, I commented at the last meeting, there's an actual number which is probably in excess of 3%. I think we just discussed it before the meeting. It's probably 3.25. So we're looking at 3.25% increase, and then we're talking about a further increase on top of that. So I'd like to see the number in the presentation. I made that comment last time, and I think that still is an important point because I think people look at it as 2.5%. GDP was just announced. Last quarter was good. Consumer spending 2.3%. That's a good quarter in recent times. So I don't understand why Ashland shouldn't be focused on 2.3%, just like the rest of the economy, instead of trying to get it 3.5, 3.25 plus. I think it's incumbent on everybody in town management, myself included as part of the Capital Committee, to find a way to keep the numbers in line. If you go back to the chart, that presented the multi-year number, it's pretty clear to me that the slope of the line changes. There's an inflection point. And this is very reminiscent for me as to the water figures with the joining the MWRA. If you're adding an increment, you have a step function, right? If you're projecting a new line at a new slope, that's a cumulative increase, suggesting you do nothing to control your costs. It's just an increase. And so I think that does the town's management a disservice, because I don't think that's really what's going on. I think a lot of good work has been done to keep the numbers in line. And so I'm not suggesting that will change. I don't believe it will. But I think we're far premature to be having a dialogue about, an override when we haven't even done the budget, haven't gone through the normal bylaw steps required. And that's my suggestion, is that we follow the correct process. Maybe some kind of super committee would be needed in the spring. But, we haven't even set the capital priorities yet. So we're, $1 million in the budget, small part. But assume that will be in alignment with everybody else's part of the budget. And, those things have to happen. They're not going to happen by this team. I don't think the goal of the bylaws of the town is that this team, which was just created, is supposed to create the whole budget. I think, that there's a different process that's in the bylaws for that budget. And I would suggest, again, strongly that we follow the correct process, the normal process. And, that's just my viewpoint. So,
All right, thank you. Does anyone want to address that? I mean, the one thing I'll say is that the Tri-Board started this process several months ago, and I see this as a supplement to the regular budget process because of the very financial issues that were uncovered at that time. So I don't know, Tony, do you want to?
Well, I think just maybe perhaps to Steve's earlier comment about keeping things within line. I mean, certainly I am a firm believer that we have to make sure that we look internally at our spending, our processes, our efficiencies. When I first got here, it was very clear as Michael came in shortly after me. I hired him. We started looking at the numbers. The town had been consistently going into its savings account to balance its budget. And we knew that really wasn't a sustainable model for the long term. And so we started looking at what were those big drivers that were causing at least part of the problem initially. I mean, healthcare was one, rising utility costs were another one. So we certainly addressed both of those. This year, we're not taking money out of our savings account to balance the budget. Yet we still see this looming problem, and some of those are in the areas of fixed costs. Our pensions assessments went up. Those are things we don't have control over, but they're must pay. Health insurance, when you look at the slope of the line, obviously we don't control the rate at which the health insurance rises because we don't do that. I mean, it gets put upon us. So there were some assumptions, obviously, that went into those particular numbers, but I just want folks to rest assured that we are looking internally. We brought performance management on board on the town side of things, and our departments to begin to look at, can we use technology as a way to provide stable or increased service without having to necessarily increase costs in doing that. So we're looking at all of those things. Yet what we're hearing from the community is, and it really goes to the budget really being a statement of values in terms of what is the community looking for from its town services, from its education services, and are our revenues going to be able to meet those expectations, because you can't have your value statement here, yet your budget will only fund this much because there's a disconnect there. So I think back to an earlier comment about we need to hear from the community about do they like the way things are now in terms of services and education, although there's a likelihood that some of that could erode if we don't do something, or do they want to see more things added? We haven't added a firefighter here in 25 years, and we know that we're woefully short in the fire service. It's something that needs to get addressed before something bad happens. But we got to make sure that we have a sustainable plan to be able to pay for those things.
Yeah, thank you very much. And just a quick follow-up on that comment. I would suggest that in this committee, you've got a subcommittee which is apparently focused on, as I heard earlier, looking at comparative towns. And I would think those resources would be a lot better served looking at town functions, efficiencies in the town, ways to save money, than to try and justify town-to-town comparisons. I think I made this comment real quickly last time. At the Southborough Town meeting, they they went to the personnel board and they just raised a bunch of salaries because they said the surrounding town salaries for the same thing were, not equivalent to Saltboro, and these people are underpaid. They were doing the job. They've been in the job for many years, been assessed in the job year to year. But, this kind of a group town mentality led to just, well, we'll just spend more money. And, I object to that. I think we should be focused on this budget, this town, these services. And if there's going to be data analysis that folks are going to spend a lot of time on, I think we should focus on efficiencies in the government, not trying to justify an increase based on another town's behavior at this.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I think one of the reasons that some of that is in there, it's not necessarily that we felt it needed to be in there, but we get a lot of questions from folks in the community about, well, we're paying too much in taxes, and so they start to compare us to other towns and say, well, okay, well, let's go take a look at that. So I think some of those we sort of got driven into. I think the same thing with from the standpoint of we're paying too much in taxes, yet we want to have services similar to pick a town that may have something that we don't have, whether it's languages, whether it's better services in DPW, whatever it happens to be. Sort of drove us in, okay, well, let's go look at that town and see what is their single family tax bill, what is their per capita spending, and what does that tell us. So I certainly understand your point, and some of that we've sort of trying to answer people's questions through the presentation.
Sure. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks,
you.
Steve.
Go ahead, Joel.
You sound kind of depressed about that.
No. I'm just concerned about time.
Okay, well, I'll say this all quickly then.
Not too quickly.
Not too quickly. You got to make sure you absorb this. First, Mike at the last presentation was talking about the town of Gill, pointing out that of course towns could be much lower in taxes, but there were many reasons that were given why it's not necessarily a very good comparison. Differences in state aid to the town, regional school district, and so on. When that came up earlier, Erin stated, did I get this right, that it would be a more valid comparison if it were a town inside 495? Yeah. So, with that said, and with the recognition that I also think that this comparison stuff is a bunch of hocus pocus and not very relevant, but wait till you hear this. Here's some data. Okay, you want to hear inside 495? I've got some data for you. Okay, see if I can read this. At the last meeting, we were told that the average property tax bill in Ashland was roughly $6,500. Did I get that right? And that's the actual bill, not rates. Now, there's a little statistical anomaly. It's the best data I can get. I challenge anybody to make it more accurate. That'd be great. The median property tax bill for Middlesex County. Now, the median isn't quite the same thing as an average, but it's an indicator. It's close. And the median property tax bill for all of Middlesex County, not these cherry-picked, Mike used the word last time, and I'm concerned that looking at a certain select group of towns, while proximate, while one could make a case for that, one certainly can make a case, and what do you hear the end part of this? For Middlesex County, the average tax bill for the entire county is, the median bill is $43.56 a year. So the average tax bill for Middlesex County, we're 50% higher than that in our average tax bill. Okay, that's number one. Now, where do you hear this? Here's the killer part of this. Of the 14 counties in Massachusetts, Middlesex County is ranked first in the state by median property taxes. So not only are we 50% higher in Ashland than Middlesex, Middlesex is numero uno in having the highest countywide taxes in the state. Well, it gets worse than that.
But Joel, that makes sense. That's Weston and Wayland and Wellesley.
It's everything, not a small group of communities that you've selected that distort the fact that we're working right next to people elsewhere in Middlesex County, and we go home and have to pay 50% more in property taxes on the same salary and the same job than other people in this county do. Okay, so that's point one. Let me get to the rest of the data. Middlesex County, ranked nationally, all counties, came in 1.46% from the highest. Okay, so 98.5% of the counties in Massachusetts are lower in their average tax bills than Middlesex County, and we're 50% above that. So that's point one on looking at data differently than it's been looked at here. Okay? That's point one. Point two, a lot has been made about the fact that you can't just look at a tax rate, you have to look at the actual amount. Well, first of all, that does. What the information I just gave is looking at the actual bill. But I also looked at tax rates because you can look at tax rates. If the guy in the next town has a very expensive house and the town is lucky enough to take in more revenues and they can lower their tax rates, would that be a reasonable argument? Here are some of the towns around here, right around our area, I'll just read a few of them, with tax rates now, not dollar amounts on the bill, lower than we have here in Ashland. Concord, Dedham, Dover, Lexington, those are some expensive ones. Marlborough, Milford, Natick, Needham, Northborough, Southborough, Upton, Walpole, all these towns have lower rates per thousand than we pay. So if the argument is that somebody has a multi-million-dollar house, of course we can tax it a little bit less. That's really what this property tax regressive system is. I mean, are we really endorsing that people with million-dollar homes should be able to pay at a lower rate than people with lesser homes? Because that's what this is, if you don't like looking at the rates. But let me just go on to try to bang through the rest of these. We have something very awkward in Ashland, and I wish this could be analyzed a little bit and data could be pulled together by your committee. It's my opinion, I constantly hear that we have a very high rate of condo ownership here in Ashland. It's atypical of many of our surrounding towns. Well, what does that do to people in single-family residences who are not condos? I own my little house up the street here. What does that do to those people? The town needs a certain amount of money to pay for the schools and the fire and the staff and all these other important functions. Well, we have this whack that we get. Not only are we out of whack with all of Middlesex County in a severe situation here, but we also take whatever we need to collect. We need to pay the teachers and the firefighters and all these important things that we do. Nobody's against these things, or shouldn't be. Excuse me. In the end, though, we have people living in $200, $300 assessment condominiums at a high percentage, and that money, the town needs a lot of money. So the people, granted, it's more assessed valuation. You know, maybe you have a better ability to pay. You're living in a nice single-family home, but we're getting killed. The people who are not in the condos are getting to raise the amount of taxes the town needs. It's a very disproportionate and high property tax rate that gets put on a select group within the town. All right, last point or two, just a kind of a summary. I got a whole long summary. I'm not going to read it. Actually, one last point, if I could. It's a question, actually. Is it the case that any of the analysis that's being done of what the town might require for an override amount is going to be exclusive of the cost associated with a likely spending on a public safety building?
I have no, I mean, that's part of one of the things we're looking at.
So it may or may not be built in.
Exactly.
Okay.
You still have to build that.
Right, so, exactly. So
Plan.
I just want to
Build,
point out,
understand the plan.
we haven't, that public safety, I've heard all kinds of numbers, but the one I hear most recently is something like 18 million. I don't know, you know, pick any number. And say that over 20 years, the debt service on that, if we were to pay it straight line, is roughly $1 million a year, you know, rounded up or down to whatever. Mm-hmm. And again, you know, we're in this awkward situation here where we don't really have a number to work with. You're in the process of assessing it. But I've heard some numbers, and I've heard numbers from people who are studying this. And some of the numbers I've heard were as high as $4 million as the override, and I've heard as low as $2.9 million. And if it's taking the low end, and it could be anything, you know, I mean, we don't have enough to work with here. But at $2.9 million, again, the emphasis I want to make here is and again, that's permanent. That's for the next 5,000 years. But if we only look at that in the so-called $20 bonding window, if that's a fair phrase for it, that's what when we borrow money for these larger capital projects, we borrow for 20 years. We're talking at, if it were $2.9 million, we're talking about voting up or down, not on a little blip on your property taxes for next year. We're talking about an expenditure, if it were 2.9 or whatever number it is, times 20 over the next 20 years of $58 million. That's what we're really talking about here, right? I mean, is it not if we have a $2.9 million override, that's going to affect this year, next year, the year after, all the way out, all 20 years if I stopped at the end point. If I stopped at 20 years, that's what you're talking.
If you have a debt exclusion, yeah.
Well, I'm not saying I'm saying if we have an override of 2.9 million, that
Unless
would,
you pass an underride, yes.
unless you pass an underride. Are you looking into that?
We haven't passed an override.
You haven't
We can't
passed an
really do
override,
that.
okay. So I just want to, so my point is that we've held off on building a public safety building, in my opinion, not that it doesn't need more study and where's it going to be sited and all these other things. But the primary reason, in my view, has been that it's a very expensive ticket. It's a big deal. It's $1 million a year, and it's been studied for 10 years already, and we still haven't done it. This situation here at 2.9 million, and that's the lowest number I've heard so far, we're talking about $58 million, or $2.9 million a year, triple what the public safety building, which we're hesitant to build because of the cost, even though we need it. We're really dragging our feet on it because of the cost. And so anyway, there's a significant, I just want to realize that there's a lot more on the table here beyond the expenditures that have been identified.
So
There's
Joel,
other
are
debt
you saying
service.
if it's under 2.9 million, you would support it?
Well, I'll get to that. So here's what it would take to have me support it.
Okay.
So I'm just going to read these last two short paragraphs.
Okay.
Okay. We have very real problems confronting us here in Ashland, and I more than acknowledge that. Overrides are a short-term, short-sighted solution, maybe a necessary solution. We need to get our economic house in order. The best way to do this is to stop the out-of-control growth, which I talked about at the last meeting, that will continue to pour more and more students into our school system and put other demands on our limited resources. We need to put an end to out-of-control growth so that we can afford to properly support the students we already have in our school system, which I support. To call for an override without changing our policies toward growth is fiscally irresponsible. Before we support an override, notice this doesn't call for not supporting an override. Before we support an override, let's make sure the town has taken the necessary action so that we aren't confronted with an override, another override, in the very near future. Thanks.
Thank you, Joel.
Rob, if I can just make one comment, Joel, I think, and I haven't heard this, I mean, I don't believe that the public safety building hasn't been built because of its cost. I think there's just other things have sort of taken priority. It just wasn't necessarily a focus, but it is now. But I think the other thing for folks to realize, nobody's trying to back into a number. Again, we get a lot of questions about, well, what's that going to mean on my tax bill if we have an override? And so, some of the numbers you heard was just to do analysis going, if it was a $6 million override, it'd be this much on it. But nobody's trying to back into a number. We need to figure out what is it that we actually need? What does the community want to see? And then what is that going to cost in terms of any potential override or anything else? So I know folks have heard numbers, but we have not sat down to figure out exactly, what it is. Part of this whole forum situation is for folks to let us know what it is that they want to see and what they value in their services and education, and then factor that in to some longer-term plan, because the chart that Michael showed is level service, where it shows that deficit building over the next 4 or 5 years to $3.5 million. That's level service. That's before we even start to add anything. So we're continuing to address that and look at those numbers.
I just hope that whatever number ultimately gets decided on, that it is emphasized that like we do for other, so that we can make a logical comparison to other 20-year capital projects. Right. We say that this isn't, if you get people thinking, $2.9 million against a $68 million budget or whatever our budget is, it's not that bad, but it's not, it's more than that because it's every year. So that the ticket you're buying here is you got to pay for it. You're not just saying I want to vote for the override because we need it right now because we got a bind. You're paying for it every single year. That same, so you got to multiply it. Maybe times 20 is a reasonable number to project it out. Right. And say that. I'd like you to be upfront and say, if we do this, it's a $58 million ticket. That's what we're talking about. Okay. And we can pay it off, pro rata over.
We get the point, Joel, and I think people did make that clear. I'm going to go to this next young young lady here.
So,
State you.
so just one more clarification, just
jeez.
Joe, on the Middlesex County thing. I mean, we all know. I mean, you know, that you can cut data any different way you like, but I'd be cautious about using Middlesex County. It's over 50 communities, and you have a lot of very small towns like, you know, Ashby, Townsend, Pepperell, Shirley, Air. I mean, those towns that we talked about earlier, like Gill, are in that grouping. So, I mean, I think we chose Metro West because that literally is where we live. And it is, even though it's in Middlesex County, it's much different than other parts of Middlesex County, the Metro West region. So I'm sure your analysis is correct, but I think folks need to put it in context that it's over 50 communities. Many of them are the very small communities, but you also have cities like Lowell and some of those that will tend to drive that number down. So.
Joel had a question about the condos that I'll just address really quickly. It's not just the condos. So 30% of our housing stock is apartments and condos, which is the second highest in the state. It's only second to Boxborough. And the average condo tax bill is, I believe, $4,000, whereas the average single family is $6,500. But that doesn't matter. To educate, the net school spending, which is what the state requires us to spend per child, is about just flat numbers, $10,000 per child. 7 of that is what the town is responsible for, or actually more like 7.5. And 2.5 is what we get in state aid. Your house has to be upwards of $500,000 or more for your property taxes to cover your one child for your town responsible portion of their education. And that's assuming you have one child. Most people in Ashland, most homes, are not valued enough. If you have 2 children, you are going to be a net negative over the 13 years your children are in school.
So you support the idea of having lower residential growth?
All right, thanks. I'm going to move along here, please.
Okay.
Ms. Rennie?
Hi, Marcia Rennie. I'll try to be quick. I really think that it's important to go back to what some people have said, that this is an important conversation for us to have, because in the end, it is really going to tell us what the future of our town is. And we can get all lost in a lot of numbers, but there's a few little things I want to put in perspective that I heard tonight. First of all, I found something that I agree with John Kerwin about, which was like huge for me. He said that Ashland's a great community, and I agree. I think we have done awesome things. But he and Mr. Featherston used the word nuclear in describing what an override is. And what I want to do is go back to when this law that created 2.5 came into effect, which I think was in the early 80s. It was intended, it came in, I think 82 was the first year, right?
Yes.
It was intended as a cap on growth in taxes in towns. It was to keep towns from willy-nilly raising taxes. We can all probably agree that's a good thing. But even the founders at the time that they created the law created the mechanism of an override. And that mechanism was put in place so that when a town found that over the course of time their expenses had grown such that the 2.5% they'd been able to raise wasn't meeting their needs, they had this solution. And the reason it's important to look at other Metro West towns is because those other towns, I believe 100% of them, have at one time or another since this law came into effect, have gone to that solution. Ashland is alone in the sense that we have never used that solution. And it's a solution that even the architects, when they created this law, knew would necessarily have to happen at some point. That's one thing. The other thing I want to go back to is what Joel said about growth. And if you remember Michael's slide where he talked about how the override worked, I think one of the most important, I don't know, Michael, can you go back to your slide where you talk about how an override works? Yep. Right there. Caps the amount of property tax levy can increase in a given year to 2.5% plus any new growth. The growth that we have had in town has been like an elixir for us. We have done all this growth because we could always use that new growth to fund things. It was like that credit card every year. That's why Ashland's grown so exponentially. And so we can connect these two things, but we can't necessarily, you can't say that the override can only happen if we cap new growth. What we can say maybe is that if we find other ways to fund the lifestyle that we want, we may not have to turn to new growth as a solution. And the last thing I would say, because we're always looking at, you know, all of these numbers. I will tell you from the school side, because that's my background, I know. I go on the DOR site all the time, on the DESC site all the time, which is the Department of Education. And you can compare what we spend per pupil across the state. And Ashland does very, very, very well. We all know that it's a big piece of our spending here. And I'm unapologetic of that because, as we've also heard people say, we have a great school system. Yes, we have it now. We won't necessarily always have it unless we continue to invest in it. That's just the reality. I can tell you that we've been doing it with, you know, glue and all the other little things that you do to stick together a system. But over time, those little, you know, places where you patch the system are going to start to show. And we are down 26 staff at a time when educating kids is getting more and more and more complicated. So I would just encourage us to be open to the conversation, to not begin our conversation by saying, I am against all overrides. That maybe isn't the right way to begin the question. The question might be, what would it take for me to think that an override is the right answer for Ashland? Maybe we'll all have a different answer to that question, but at least let's be open to that question. That's it.
Thank you.
Hi,
Matt?
I'm Matt Marshquist. I just want to talk about some of the things that made Ashland great for us. My wife and I moved here 5 years ago. We moved here initially for the schools. She's a teacher. She got a job here. The school climate in Ashland is great. She was moving from an affluent town on the South Shore, which was not even close to Ashland in terms of the climate and how much support the teachers had and how great they were able to work with the students because of that, the great things they were able to accomplish. So I just want to say this, I agree that the schools are excellent. That we also moved here because it's a great value for the community, the area that we're in. You know, we lived in a few different communities before we settled in Ashland, and it really is a good value for where we're at and the services that we get. I also, you know, appreciate the community. We've been involved in different projects, the Farmers Market Sustainability Committee, and while I was on the Sustainability Committee, I was able to tour the schools, and my wife works at the high school, which is the newest. We did a tour of the middle school while we were looking at some of the improvements that we might make for sustainability, cost savings. And, you know, it was a few years ago before they fixed the roof and there were buckets in the hallway. And if you go to any of the schools except for the high school in town, you will see the kind of budget that we have for facilities and how it's kind of stretched to the limit. And you see that on the town side as well with the benefits that are, you know, being cut to make savings that are necessary. So I really think, you know, we have a good value here, and especially when you look at what we get as a town. I was going to ask what, Tony answered my question. It's level funding, seeing that graph as they separate. So I want to just say, you know, I think it's great that you're asking us what we would like to see as a town. I think it's really important. I hope these meetings can get even more close to that answer. The conversation here is, you know, went around quite a bit, but that's really the heart of this is what do people want to see? And I want to see more than just level funding, because some of the things that have been cut, particularly in the schools, you know, I heard the term discretionary, but you know, we had a curriculum director that was cut, and the cuts in arts and theater, you know, those programs are considered optional by some people, but when you start cutting those things, it does impact how well-rounded your students are. And even if all you care is about test scores, those programs actually support MCAS scores. The more you reduce those programs, you know, it does have an impact on how well students do. So I would like to see, you know, a slide that shows us what can we do to actually bring some of these things back that we're cutting as a town, and maybe add another firefighter. Maybe, you know, what would it take to reach a higher level than just level funding? That's all. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah. Go ahead, Mark.
Good evening. Mark Sony, Porter Crawl, 49 Hawthorne Road, proud Ashland County and lifelong resident. What's coming up on Thursday is where I'm coming to tonight. Mr. Herbert, I had a little bit of a conversation, we had a little bit of a conversation. I asked what if with or was it without? I'm going to bring it up, but I'm going to ask without for the town side of things. What would happen if the override fails without the school? What would the rest of the town happen? Can the finance or Michael answer that? Both.
Well, I mean, that's something that we would be looking at from the long-range financial planning group, because we would have to make cuts. You know, as a management team, we would have to get together and hopefully with the input of the community, okay, figure out what it is we would cut.
Okay, and we talked and I asked about a list, and that's going to be on that list of things that could be, and if the override passes still without the school, how much money are we going to gain if we could for regular municipal services and everything that is the town?
I don't understand the question.
The question is, can the town survive an override or not, or fail the override with or without school money that's involved?
Yeah, I mean, the town, I mean, I don't want to make it sound like the town will fold if there is not an override that passed. The town of Ashland will continue to exist. It's just what level of service do you want to have as a town? I mean, I'm not going to make any kind of comparisons, but Lawrence still exists. Springfield still exists. They both went into receivership. They're still sovereign bodies of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But again, it's what level of service do you want to have?
Right. If I can just comment, Mark, just for a second, I think it goes back to something Steve Morgan brought up. I mean, you know, as we work through this, and Steve Mitchell sort of outlined the timeline, and if the selectmen were to determine that this would go to a ballot vote, when that might be, we still are going to have to follow our normal budgeting process. We can't just wait to see if this happens or doesn't happen before we put a budget together. So, you know, we'll be doing a number of things simultaneously as we're continuing to have this conversation with the community and with the elected officials about where this may lead. We're going to still need to do our normal budgeting, and you know, so when that starts to play out, then that's when we have to discuss, you know, if an override doesn't happen or we run into a particular situation, how do we plan on you know, balancing our budget, because we will need to have a balanced budget come next May, one way or the other.
And the balanced budget before the new high school was built was easier because of lack of expansion of enrollment. Now, since the high school has been built, I was on this committee, the town has grown 5 or 6% upper every year in residents, in growth comparison to other towns, for which my always answer is, the other towns look in the mirror, they see Ashland. No, we're Ashland, we're unique, and we're the citizens that are living here. It comes down to family, elders, citizens, and you got this coming up Thursday, which some people will come, some people won't. Some people who think they're too proud to say anything to make their appearance will say, you go and tell me what happens when you come back. That's easy to say because you live in the same house with an elder. And that's what I have all my life. One elder that I got left, my late mother died 15-something years ago from cancer. She was 70. And now I got a father that's 90. Both of us are on Social Security. I'm on disability, under poverty level funds. And you're expecting a person like me and my father, who don't have dogs in the races, don't have anybody, because we're such a parents and son, that I was with the school 40+ years before I left in 2008. And then it got too political, and everybody was working off for their own agendas then. It hasn't really changed. So I'm saying, override yes, override no. The school has put up the expenses in this town for us veteran elders, fixed incomers, to pay their bill. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mark. Hi, Jane.
Hi, Jane Greenstein. When I came to stand in line, While there were some really thoughtful questions, in my opinion, that had been asked, the majority of the comments that had been made seemed to be, to me, of the nature, well, we need to, we're in this bind because of this external factor, that external factor, this reality, that reality. We need to fix that first. We need to address this. We need to, anything but what we have control over in Ashland. And I had to get up out of my seat and say, I don't disagree with all of the realities that swirl around us that create why Ashland is in the bind it's in. I don't have a magic wand, and I know no one in this room has a magic wand. And even if every person in the town spent 40 hours a week advocating at the state level, at the federal level, at the whatever level, to fix the problems, they wouldn't all get fixed, and probably zero of them would get fixed in time for us to have a functional budget in the spring. So we can keep having these magical thinking arguments about what really is the problem, but we don't have any control of that. Really, we don't. And all we can do is figure out how we're gonna have a budget for our town, for our services. And I really have to say this out loud. It is not the school and the town. It is the town. We have all kinds of services that any town or municipality offers: schools, police, fire, senior services, community recreation. We could all list them. This is not about the school versus everything else. We are a town. We happen to be a predominantly residential town, which means we have a much larger percentage of our population that is here with children than in other places that are more diverse in socioeconomically. We also don't have businesses, and we can, again, talk, as people have been talking from Kingdom Come, about how we need to fix that problem. We still only have so much control over that as well, and we're not gonna do anything that's gonna fix it. So I felt it was really important to stand up here so that the only voices that were being represented were, we have to fix all these other things. I wanted at least there to be a voice, again, at the time I came up, that's what motivated me, that gives the public feedback to say, I'm asking you to think about what we can do in a realistic place, to be reality-based, not fantasy-based. And the reality is that yes, there are probably even more efficiencies, and I really encourage you guys to list every single, I don't care if it was saved you $10, saved the community $10, list every single thing that's been done in the last whatever relevant number of years that has already been done to be more cost effective, to be more efficient, to reduce our expenditures, because that's clearly important. You don't just keep throwing money out the window. You replace your windows sometimes when they're leaking. Okay. But when push comes to shove, there's only so much of that we're gonna do. And I want us to think about that. And I just want that voice to be one that's heard. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you guys for doing your work, and I'll be quick because I understand time's an issue.
Take your time.
So a lot of the comments also were about, there were some people comparing us to more communities, there were some people saying we shouldn't be compared to any communities, and I just kind of wanted to bring the focus back. If we're having a discussion about doing an operational override, is it because within the next 5 years we're not going to be able to give level services with the money that we currently have coming in from taxes? Yes or no? That's a yes. So it doesn't matter what Framingham's doing, and it doesn't matter what Westwood's doing, and it doesn't matter what Gill's doing. In 5 years' time, we're not going to have enough money to meet the services that we currently have in this town, period. So let's all think about that. So another question I had, and there was a lot of, and this always comes up, nobody wants to pay more taxes. I don't want to pay more taxes, and the thing that always comes up is, well, let's get creative with the budget. And, I sat through this year's budget process in a number of meetings, and I saw a lot of the discussions, and I saw a lot of what was going on. And I just want to talk a little bit, as Jane just said, about there's a lot going on in this town in terms of trying to be creative and find efficiencies. But the reality of the situation is we've been trying to be creative and find efficiencies since Prop 2.5 passed in, 1980? And inflation many years is well above 2.5%. And growth only gets you so far. So just to give an example of where we're at, regionalization. Can somebody tell me what it was that we were trying to look into regionalizing this year to see if we could save money?
We looked at fire, but we also have done, we've done some internal regionalization as well with the IT department. We have regionalized nursing services. We have regionalized animal control, which we're looking at expanding that. But the fire one didn't go, but there are other opportunities that we are looking at.
So, exactly. So the town government is constantly looking at different ways to be creative and to save more money. I'm sure that they've mentioned the insurance because I hear about that one a lot as a great effort that there was to save the town money. I'm sure that and I missed a little bit at the beginning of the presentation, I'm sure the solar was talked about as how to save on the utility bills. And then let's talk about some of the hard stuff, because these guys have tried to be creative and tried to do good by our town, but in all circumstances, you can't get away with just doing these creative things, and sometimes you have to make hard choices. Jim, how many people have been laid off from the schools in the last 10 years?
In the last 10 years, it's 40 plus, but net, again, we'll work with the number of in the 20s.
Because of the mandates, certain positions had to be added.
Certainly mandates, but I think if we're doing our justice as well as that part of the business aspect, if you will, we're analyzing every single year the programs that we have, and there are probably some positions in there that were reduced because those programs no longer were needed. But there are many programs that we're adding because of the mandates. Therefore, in order to do that, to keep that balanced budget, we have to reduce other staff members.
So I think the point that I'm trying to make is that this group, and not just the override committee, but the government as a whole is being creative and is making hard decisions every year. And while nobody in any municipality anywhere would say that they have a perfect government who's doing the best job ever that could ever be done every single year, I mean, I have to, take my hat off and say, all right, these guys have really been trying. They've really tried every possible thing that was out there. I just have one other question for the committee. If there was another way to solve our fiscal problems, would you be looking at a Prop 2.5 operational override? No. Can somebody please say that out loud into a mic?
No.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes, sir.
Charles.
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I was waiting for your okay.
You're the first one. Okay.
Yeah, Izzy Asenko, 9 Lakeview Terrace here in Ashland. I just got through listening to a lady who came up and said the town and your government, I mean your town and your schools, okay? Since I've been here in Ashland, that's the way I always looked at this town. When my kids were in school, it was great. I was always on the school side. Now that my kids are gone, I happen to have grandkids, and they're in the school system. So I'm still with the schools, but I gotta hammer my government, okay? And the reason why I say this is that it's not equal. It's not equal. I want to, but before I forget this, I just want to say thank you very much for this committee. But I'm sort of disappointed whoever did this committee. I'm sort of disappointed that the police chief wasn't invited to be on this committee. The fire chief is not invited, and I asked him, and he said that he would have loved to have been on this committee. I asked him that. I just want to say that yes, the town is divided, and it's divided pretty bad, I think, myself personally. Yes, we need an override for firefighters, big time. Just like our town manager said, we haven't hired a firefighter in 25 years. Does that sound normal to everybody here? Of course not. Of course not. But we do have the best school system in the Metro West, I believe, the last time I heard.
No.
We don't. We don't?
No.
Well, what do we have best of? Because it wasn't that long ago. Where do we actually stand with the schools?
Izzy, so if we're looking if we're looking at statistics in terms of, again, all metrics, right? We're talking about all the data we can look at and what they use to measure schools. They typically only measure high schools. That's typically where we're looking at the rankings of school systems, because we're the ones taking the tests. The high schools are the ones sending kids to college. So those rates matter. So if you're looking at Ashland High School in the past 3 to 5 years, it's consistently ranked of the 351 communities in the top 30 schools in the state. It's consistently ranked one of the top schools from a climate standpoint. It's been as high as received recently in the U.S. News and World as a gold medal school. Which ranked them.
That's what I was looking at.
We were one of only a very few in the Metro West. Yeah.
Now, how come the junior high and the elementary don't get out there?
I think partly it's just not the same rating system. Most often they look at the high schools. Now, the middle school, for instance, if you went and looked at the actual data on the Department of Ed website, is actually a very highly ranked school system, but they don't rank them the same way. So, but again, you're looking at just MCAS scores. And
okay.
Yeah.
I thought that included the whole school.
It does. Quite typically, it doesn't.
But anyways, getting back to our fire department, I just want to say that we're living in this beautiful community here, and you don't have enough firefighters to take care of your house and mine. We have the greatest group out there in Ashland, firefighters, but you don't have enough. That's all I'm saying, okay? That's all I want to leave you with that. And thank you, my town manager, thank you very much for all you've done to try to get more firefighters here. Thank you so much. I'm sure you understand, and I'm hoping that the board understands too. And to have the fire chief and the police chief on this committee would have been a big deal. You would have been right on. I think if you took everybody here that was supposed to be here, I guess, I counted five school members on this board when it first started, or had connection with the school, I should say. And I don't think that's right.
There would be 4.
Okay? Yeah, well.
4.
Well.
Including the staff.
Well, okay, that's fine. That's fine. That's still out of 8 people. So you got half school members or connected with schools. It would have been nice to have a fire chief, or even the guy who does the roads on this committee. These people are all important. We know the schools are important, but these other people are important too. That's what makes a town. That's what this lady just got through telling you. That's what makes it a town.
So if I can just comment on that for a minute.
Sure.
I mean, obviously, from the town side, I represent the town and all of them. So certainly Chief Davis, Chief Boothby, Dave Manugian from DPW, Paula Benetti from the library, those folks will all have an integral role in determining, the shape of any potential override and what they need in order to accomplish their mission and their job. So I can assure you and promise you of that. Even though they're not sitting here, they will have an integral role in making sure that their voices are heard from what they need to support our seniors, the library, and those other services. So you have my guarantee on that.
Well, thank you. I'll end on that note. Thank you.
Thank you, Izzy.
Thanks, Izzy. Is there anybody else wants to ask a question or make a statement? Just any brief messages from anybody on the committee wants to just make a brief statement about before we wrap up? So everybody said enough? Okay. All right. So I want to thank you all for coming out here tonight. I thought this was a very useful discussion. I mean, the reason we're here is to tell people the process that we've gone through and what we're thinking and the issues that we see and get feedback and thoughts from people. So all these ideas are valuable. This is stuff, we're taking this down. We're going to go back and talk about it. And so thank you for coming out to this. So I think that wraps it up. So thank you.